welcome back everyone. We now begin our session 4. This session will be moderated by Mr. Shafkat Munir, Senior Research Fellow, Head of BCTR at BIPSS. Our final speaker for the day is Major General Binaj Basniat, retired from Nepalese Army, and he is also an independent strategic analyst. Now, I would like to invite Mr. Shafkat Munir to start the session. Thank you.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. We have come to almost the finishing line of our conference, and we are very pleased to have a very noted strategic analyst from Nepal, Suprabal Janshevasri, Major General Binoj Basniat, retired, who will be speaking to us about climate chaos, border tensions, navigating climate security in a warming world. When we talk about climate security, ladies and gentlemen, I think one of the key aspects that we have to look at is that how it is going to impact or exacerbate existing tensions that exist between countries. So far, we have talked about several non-traditional security challenges, but it is also important that how we also look at the whole aspect of climate security, the interplay with geopolitics, the interplay with bilateral issues, and so on. From Mr. Bharat Bhushan's presentation, we've already seen that how water can become a stressor in bilateral relations, whether in the case of India-Bangladesh or India-Pakistan. But there are several other issues as well, which is ultimately going to be affected by climate change when it comes to border security and bilateral relations. General Binoj Basniat, whom I have had the privilege of knowing for many years, from your time as Commandant Staff College. And he's a very noted strategic analyst. He pursues with keen interest in geopolitics with an emphasis on politics, diplomacy, security, centering South Asia and Southeast Asia. He's a graduate of Royal Military Academy Sandhurst, U.S. Army Command and Staff College Fort Leavenworth, and National Defense College New Delhi, and along with other institutions. And most notably, one important thing would be we both went to the Asia Pacific Center for Security Studies in Hawaii, so we have that common connection. He is conferred with Masters of Philosophy degree in Defense and Strategic Studies, first class, and holds a Masters in Military Art and Science, and also Masters in Diplomacy and International Relations. And I may also mention that General Basniat was ADC to His late Majesty King Birendra. So he also has numerous articles, papers, research papers, journal articles, and also speaks quite a lot on strategic issues. And I, for one, follow his writings very closely and always learn from them. So he has served as Commandant of the Nepalese Army Command and Staff College, also the Nepalese Army War College, and headed various other training institutions. So just to put a number, he has published more than 230 articles on strategic issues and geopolitical matters in diverse national and international broadsheets. So without further ado, General, it's all yours.
Namaste, Salam Alaikum, and good afternoon to everybody. So, thank you, Chair Safkat Munir, and thank you for inviting me, the BIPSS, for organizing such a desired and the topic of climate security. So, I'd like to take this opportunity also to acknowledge General A.N.M. Munir and the BIPSS team, who has been so helpful getting all the things done here, for your warmth, hospitality, Saraf, Samuel, and the entire BIPSS team. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here today in Dhaka when you are celebrating the Shahid Sena Divas. So greetings to everybody on the Shahid Sena Divas. And so I'm going to look at my delivery from the strategic and policy perspective. So looking into the security of climate it has two bends. One is the political and the geopolitical landscape, and the other is the environmental or climate perspectives. It has two curves. It is politics drives or directs the nation state, and climate will shape the conditions or semblances the state of affairs. And it has two mixtures, nations big or small, powerful or weak, recognize political boundaries. At the other angle, climate acknowledges a livelihood and humanity. So, discussing about South Asia or Southern Asia, I will be illustrating nation states south of the Himalayas, geographically, and from the Karakoram to Myanmar. So, particularly 9 nations who are members of SARC, BIMSTEC, and all are members of the United Nations Framework Conventions on Climate Change. Some are part of multilateral organizations like the BIBIN, SASEC. In addition, global governance systems like China's Global Common Shared Future, and that consists of BRI, GDI, GSI, GCI, and the US-led Build Back the Better World that embraces the Partnership for Global Infrastructure Investment, and the IMEC, India Middle East Economic Corridor, or Indian Middle East Corridor. So besides this, the nation states of South Asia have been actively involved in BRICS, SU, G7, G20, and G77. In the region, we have 3 landlocked countries, Afghanistan, Bhutan, and Nepal. Geographically, climate-wise, we have 2 sea-locked countries, or the islands, Maldives and Sri Lanka, and west for Bangladesh, India, Myanmar, and Pakistan, land who have their connections with the seas. So the conflict between political decisions and the climate crisis is a critical issue that undermines effective environmental action. So chaos is on the rise. Governments often prioritize short-term economic growth over long-term sustainability, leading to policies that accelerate climate change. For instance, reliance on fossil fuels driven by political interests and lobbying from powerful energy sectors. Additionally, political instability and competing national priorities often divert attention from climate issues. Elections, political agendas, and international relations can hinder necessary commitments to climate action. So leaders may avoid making tough decisions that could be unpopular with constituents, delaying the implementations of vital legislations aimed at reducing emissions or investing in green technologies. Moreover, climate justice plays a crucial role in episodes, communities, and nation states. To reconcile or shift towards inclusive, science-based policymaking is essential, emphasizing the long-term benefits of sustainability over the short-term policy gains. So South Asia is a region considered one of the most environmentally vulnerable regions, facing increasingly severe impacts from climate change. With a dense populations exceeding 2.04 billion, or about one-fourth of the world's population, the impacts of climate chaos in this dense populated area profound, presenting significant socioeconomic challenges. The region is uniquely positioned geographically, boasting vast mountain ranges, fertile plains, and extensive coastlines, all of which are susceptible to the winds of climate change. So, climate change, as well as geopolitical factors, are impacting climate security, and the vulnerability require integrated economy-wide strategies and political will to strengthen resilience, and mitigate impacts of these formidable confronts. So navigating climate security is about the multinations, it is multi-sided, it is polygon. with multidimensional challenges as well as the geopolitics in play. Therefore, my presentation today will be on four folds. One, I will be talking a little bit about the trends of climate chaos in South Asia. Second, I will deal with the intergovernmental organizations, particularly SARC and BIMSTEC's role in climate change and the challenges they have. Third, I will talk about the geopolitics in climate security in South Asia. And lastly, the navigating climate security in South Asia and measures. So the trends of climate chaos in South Asia manifest through various phenomena, from the mountain regions, primarily the Himalayas, to the seas, which are highly vulnerable due to things that we've been talking about from yesterday, all the climate issues, extreme weather, temperatures, erratic rainfall, altering climate, weather patterns, the rise of sea levels. But it is not, but the mostly talked about is the islands being under the water. But at the same time, it is the mountains and impact in the mountains that is being equally impacted, like in the seas. So let me talk about. I'll give you some climate events contributing to the vulnerability of climate change. In 2024, the World Health Organization guidelines and the Air Quality Index provided a clear picture of the environmental health risks faced in various nations. And four countries of South Asia is in the top 5 countries in the report. Bangladesh ranks 1, Pakistan ranks 2, India ranks 3, Bahrain 4, and Nepal 5th. So in recent years, South Asia has witnessed unprecedented heat waves, intense monsoon rainfalls, and severe flooding, all indicative of climate change's far-reaching impacts. Heat waves in India and Pakistan. In 2010, heat waves claimed over 1,300 lives in Ahmedabad in India. In 2023, both India and Pakistan experienced severe heat waves with temperatures exceeding 50 degrees. And this extreme heat led to widespread health issues, increased mortality rates, and damages to crops. But the good part is Ahmedabad deployed a comprehensive heat action plan by investing in heat warning systems. So public awareness, campaigns, healthcare, training, and innovative cooling solutions, the city has saved over 2,300 deaths so far. India has adapted efforts that are equally significant. Second is the flooding in Bangladesh in 2022. So the monsoon patterns change, heavy monsoon rain in catastrophic flooding across southeastern and northeastern Bangladesh. Millions were displaced and there were extensive damages to homes, agriculture, and infrastructure. India was characterized by extreme variability. Regions that typically experiences ample rainfall faced drought conditions, while others are inundated. So such are disasters for agriculture, which is bad for the economy. Crops fail, livestock suffer. In the UN News of 29 August 2024, it says that floods, landslides wreak havoc across South Asia. The headline says over 18 million people in Bangladesh have been affected by severe monsoon conditions, with more than 1.2 million families trapped in flash floods, submerged vast areas of the country's east and southeast. India was hit by extraordinary rainfall for over 72 hours, resulting in some of the most severe floods since 1983. 2,000 resulting landslides, reportedly affecting 1.7 million people, including around 117,000 who have been displaced to relief camps. 26 people were said to have been killed. So the monsoon rain also wreaked havoc in Nepal, a country on the front lines of climate change, experiencing more erratic, intensive weather and rapid warming of glaciers, leading to severe flash floods and landslides. A glacier lake outburst, a flood in the country's Everest region, wiped out the village of Thame, situated at the altitude of 3,800 meters. More than 2,000 deaths, including deaths in the capital, Kathmandu. So 65 people died when two buses also collided by the monsoon. And in Pakistan, disaster, the lives of 243 people since July that year. Third is the cyclone 2021. In May 2021, cyclone Yas hit the eastern coast of Bangladesh and India, causing severe damage due to high winds and tide surges. But Bangladesh is, has become a global pioneer in community-based adaptation. In addition, prepared a cyclone preparedness program. There are less than 500 lives lost compared to 500,000 in the 1970 Vola cyclone. And the Himalayan glaciers melt. The ongoing glacier retreat in the Himalayas is a critical concern for South Asia, influencing water supply for millions. In 2021, the Chamoli disaster in Uttarakhand, India, was triggered by the sudden melting of glaciers, leading to catastrophic flooding. And droughts in Afghanistan, 2021 again, faced one of the most severe droughts in decades. Forest fires in Nepal in 2023, which is contributing to the ecosystem, to the enhancing pollution and rising sea levels. So these all refers to the Himalayas, the hills and the plains, from the Himalayas to the seas. So there is increased frequency of disasters, water scarcity and disharmony, food security challenges, and impacts on biodiversity and ecosystem. So what has the intergovernmental organization's role in climate change? Basically, I will be talking more about the SARC and BIMSTEC and their contribution to the climate security. At the same time, acknowledging the fact, the efforts, bilateral efforts from international organizations for climate security. So SARC engagements is institutional framework and initiative. SARC has established various mechanisms of initiative aimed at addressing climate change and promoting environmental sustainability. So after 13 years of the establishment, in 2008, SARC Action Plan of Climate Change was adopted. This action plan primarily focused on mitigation and adaptation and disaster management. So given the frequent occurrence of natural disasters in the region, SARC has been focused on enhancing regional cooperation in disaster risk reduction. The SARC Disaster Management Center was established as a regional body to facilitate cooperation and exchange of information related to disaster management. Biodiversity and natural resources management. SARC was also engages in initiatives related to biodiversity conservation and sustainability. And South Asian regional cooperation in energy is there to address climate-related challenges by promoting and sharing of clean energy technologies and regional energy cooperation. BIMSTEC too has addressed the climate security issues. And further, so BIMSTEC also has introduced the BIMSTEC framework for energy cooperation. And it has also focused on disaster management with the formation of Disaster Management Center, established with the aim to improve regional disaster response, enhance cooperation among member states. And the other, the BIMSTEC has been doing is a collaborative research and capacity building. It recognizes the cross-border climate issues as well. So what are the challenges in climate issues. So, despite initiatives, SARC is not functioning. BIMSTEC is, initiating, but eventually the challenges remain as it is. One is and it's due to political tensions, dynamics and commitment. Second is limited capacity, resources and disparities. Third is fragmented policies. Fourth, inconsistent participation, like the non-existence uh, existence of SARC, and there is focus on multiple sectors. So there is no focus on one part of there. So there's so many things involved. And let me just touch upon, since we have so many people here in the uniforms, and let me just touch upon how uh, most of the armies or the defense forces, law enforcement forces, are the first responders, mostly in South Asian countries and worldwide now. So the Nepalese army in the climate change and security, it is not just focused on the preparedness and response. It is also focusing now on prevention and planning. So it involves efforts to reduce the effects of climate change through conservation, waste management, and solar power. These efforts include afforestation, wetland creation, and preservations. So the army has been involved in analyzing how climate change may impact national security. So the national security policy of Nepal has identified climate change as a threat to country's ability to protect its citizens. In the conservation area, the army has established a Directorate of Forest and Environment, secret to support conservation efforts. So the army protects 12 of 22 national parks since 1975, one wildlife reserve and one hunting reserve. So anti-poaching, the army helped to achieve zero poaching years for rhinos and other endangered species. With 121 tigers in 2000, it has now reached to 752. Waste management. So the army has conducted a mountain cleaning campaigns in the Everest and the mountain regions, which was to reduce human-made pollution in the Himalayas. So by 2024, the army removed 180 metric tons of waste and remains of 12 climbers from the Everest region. Solar power. The army has set aside land for solar-powered car parks at the peacekeeping training center facilities. The project was helped by the army to learn how to troubleshoot and adapt to climate change. Afforestation. More than 2 million trees in the mid-hills of Nepal have been planted, and 20 wetlands have been looked after. So in summary, the Nepalese army's multifaceted role in climate security highlights its significance, not only as a national defense force, but also as a key actor in humanitarian aid, community resilience building, environmental protection, and policy advocacy. So understanding the geopolitics in South Asia and impacts in climate security. Last 3 years have been having three theaters: Russian and Ukraine war from 2022, Israel and Gaza crisis from 2023, and the Red Sea crisis at a part of the axis of resistance that began in 2023. So the geopolitical surroundings say that Europe is in the post-Cold War time, the Indo-Pacific region is in the new Cold War era, and the Middle East is in the midst of global power game, and the sea lane are where proxy wars. So the triangular power competition in South Asia with US, China rivalry, and China and India competition. The US policies of pivot to Asia happened 2 months after 9/11. And 2022 United States National Secretary Studies states, quote, China is the only competitor with both the intent to reshape the international order and increasing the economic, diplomatic, military, and technological power to it. Beijing has ambitions to create an enhanced sphere of influence in the Indo-Pacific and to become the world's leading power, unquote. So after this concept, Beijing further committed. President Xi first raised the idea, quote, promote a sense of community of shared future of mankind, unquote, at the 18th National Congress of the Communist Party of China in 2012, November. In 2013, the Belt and Road Initiative. 2015, the AIB, the Asian International Infrastructure Development Bank, after the agreement into force in December 2015. In 2017, when China embarked on its reform era, it dropped the Maoist doctrine of exporting revolution for a low-profile strategy summarized by Deng Xiaoping as hide your strength and bide your time. In March 2023, Xi Jinping coined a new 24-character formula for the conduct of foreign policy, elaborating Deng's hide and bide formula with a vivid refrain, dare to fight. So, Global Development Initiative proposed in the United Nations 2021, Global Security Initiative proposed during the annual BOA conference, and Global Civilization Initiative at the in March 2023. India's policies from First Neighborhood, Act East, Connect Central Asia, Think West, Security and Growth of All in the Region Sagar has a direct relevance with the global and multilateral initiatives. So in June 2021, the Group of Seven unveiled the Build Back Better World B3W initiative, which holds Partnership for Global Infrastructure and Investment PGII in 2022. And during the G20 summit in Delhi, India, Middle East, Europe Economic Corridor. So South Asia, talking about its considering geographic things. So political, economic, social disturbances has been occurring in the last 2 years. Belt and Road Initiative, 2013, Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank in 2016 has taken place and has initiated also a competition and confrontation between China and India from 2017 from the Doklam issues. And it can be said that from a peaceful rise, China has entered a positional rise rather than a peaceful rise. So the US and allies completed its withdrawal from Afghanistan on August 2021. On February 1st, 2021, the Myanmar military overthrew the democratically elected government. Sri Lanka in May 2022, economic crisis followed by political and social inability. Pakistan's political unrest leading to economic crisis, March 2022. Maldives, April 2023, electoral process leading to India out. Bangladesh political upheavals, August 2024, domestic and geopolitical reasons. So South Asia has 4 strategic environments and 4 political systems. One is electoral system as peaceful measures for flanking with powers like the Maldives. Political problems like in Pakistan and Bangladesh. Economic problems leading to social and political problems in Sri Lanka. And the military taking power in Afghanistan and Myanmar. 4 political systems, constitutional monarchy and democracy in Bhutan, military rule in Afghanistan and Myanmar, presidential system in Maldives, and parliament democracy system in the rest 5. So a clear message with influence and use of technology, non-state actors, and essential support for war, for preparation of war, and polarizations of faith and belief, democratic values versus autocracy of this society. So the question arises, will the constraints and the irritants assist the much needed choice of climate security. So, this comes to my last part on navigating climate change. So, three notable considerations. One is the financial constraint. Second is the climate science integration. And third is the institutional capacity building. So, climate security challenges and the way forward. The geopolitical landscape presents mainly four challenges to address in climate security: lack of trust and effective cooperation, fragmented approach, prioritizations of security concerns, and lastly, economic dependencies and trade barriers. So, amid these pressing challenges and cooperation, a range of multifaceted measures and approaches that prioritize climate security within the geopolitical framework can be employed at both national and regional levels to combat climate chaos in South Asia. When SAC and BIMSTEC's ineffectiveness is questioned, our revolutionary measures may be an answer. So, a formation of a South Asian government for environment and protection, which encompasses with regional cooperations by building trust through dialogue, helping regional frameworks, leveraging international support, and incorporating climate change in national security policies, and promoting sustainable development goals. And the second wave I would like is the defense forces role or defense diplomacy's role in green diplomacy. The role I talked about, discussed about the Nepalese army. So let me end with what Nepal Foreign Minister tells the International Court of Justice in Hague Court in December 2024 in the public hearing on obligations of states in respect to climate change. Quote, "We are having to bear the brunt of the impacts of climate change in a disproportionate manner. In fact, we are paying for a bad karma we did not create. We have been penalized for the mistakes we never made, for the crimes we never committed." Unquote. Thank you.
Thank you, General. Yeah, I think that was a very profound quote by the Nepalese foreign minister, because too often in our part of the world, we are paying for climate change effects which we have not caused. And I think it's important for us to remember that. Thank you for your presentation and also for highlighting the role played by SAC, because I think quite often we forget this, that but SAC was one of the pioneering regional organizations to talk about environmental security. I mean, climate change as a term only entered into vogue in 2004, 5, or 2006 even. But much before that, SAC was talking about environmental security, about ecological protection, about the need for countries to work together for environmental protection. So it's very unfortunate that now that the SAC process has become moribund, we are losing many of the momentum that we had in terms of regional cooperation on environmental issues. I'm also particularly heartened by the fact that you have talked quite a bit about the role of armed forces in climate change, because that is a recurring theme that you hear more often in the international security conferences. I was just in Munich for the Munich Security Conferences, and one of the most important panel discussions there was on armed forces and climate change. Because as the effect of climate change becomes more significant, as climate security challenges become more important, the armed forces of the world will have to step up and play their role in helping countries deal with this effect, but also in managing and countering many of the threats which are emanating as a result of climate change. We have talked about migration, we have talked about food over the last 2 days, but there is also a connection to organized crime. There are now empirical studies showing how climate change has fueled civil disorder and disturbance, led to terrorism, and so on. And especially when we talk about the impact of climate change in conflict states in particular, these effects will become even greater. I note that you talked about the Nepalese army's contribution to ecological preservation and climate change. And I'm very much aware of the work the Nepalese army has done, particularly in the mountains, in the Himalayas, in terms of ecological protection, preservation, and I vividly remembered the activities of the NA after the 2015 deadly earthquake. And across South Asia, our militaries will have to be geared up more for what we now call HADR operations. And HADR or HADR training, HADR content, HADR management will dominate a lot of our curriculum as well. So before I launch into the question and answer session, I want to sort of take the prerogative to ask you the first question. How do you think, and given your long background in this area, how do you think military education and training needs to be retooled to equip our officers across the South Asian armed forces to orient themselves with some of these new challenges?
Um, I think firstly, the relationship between defense forces in South Asia is good. I mean, like when I've been talking this, from yesterday when I've been meeting people, everyone has friends somewhere or the other in the South Asian nations. So the connection is there. It is just putting that connection into, let's say, reality and giving and putting in things that issues and that we need for our common good. So probably when we exchange our programs, when we have joint exercises, when the defense forces have, participate in different educational programs in different countries, I think putting up in climate security as an issue and how we could address together would be a starting point and would be halfway through. And when I put the way forward, one of the things I talked about was green diplomacy through military diplomacy or defense diplomacy. And so I think it would be a starting point. And but I think this would help a lot in influencing the political leaders. At the same time, I think putting its weight for the common challenges.
May I now open the floor? Yes.
Thank you, sir. I am Lieutenant Colonel Muntasir from Bangladesh Army. Presently, I am serving in a logistic area of Dhaka Cantonment. Thank you, respected General, Major General Binaz Basniat, for your informative talk. We are much more learned about from your talk. Sir, I have two questions basically. Because in our this today's conference, we have the droughts, floods, and fault lines. And the many speakers have talked about this droughts and also the flood situation. But I think, if I'm not wrong, the fault line is not much discussed in these 2 days. So I thought that you will be most prominent person to talk about that because you are from Nepal. So in this our region, this is the home of the tectonic plate, we know. And for this region, basically the Nepal and also the India are much more earthquake prone countries, and we have already faced those situations earlier. So in this cause, so in the long term economic disruption, how do you manage the situation as a first respondent of the country, as you have said, in Nepalese army? And also you have some strategic goals you can issue those things. This is my first question. And the second question is that, sir, in your subject, there was a catchword, that is the border tension. So the border tension plays a vital role for helping the people deciding the border areas. So do you have anything to say in that also, in that point also? Thank you, sir.
Thank you. We'll take next question from Mr. Bharat Bhushan.
Thank you, General, for an excellent presentation. I didn't know how much work the Nepal Army was doing in the field of climate and environmental protection. So I have two questions. One is, whatever the Nepalese Army does for ecological protection and climate change mitigation, is it part of a overall plan, or are they ad hoc actions that, tiger population is going down, nobody can do anything, so tell the army to help in that, or there's a disaster, call in the army as the first responder, or is there a comprehensive plan? That is one question. And second one is, you've talked of green diplomacy through military diplomacy. I think it's an excellent idea. Now, the relations between Nepalese army and the Indian army are probably the best in the subcontinent, because the chief of army staff of India is also the honorary general of the Nepal army, and the Nepal army's chief of army staff is the honorary general of the Indian army. So, given these sort of intense and good relations, has there been any green diplomacy between India and Nepal through the military diplomacy? And are there any examples of it?
Right. Next question from the back.
Uh, Good afternoon, esteemed guests. I am Farhana Rashid and working as a research intern in BIPSS. And my question to Mr. Binoj is that as you were former defense personnel in the Nepalese army, so what's your recommendation on how can South Asian nations integrate climate security into their strategic defense policies to mitigate the risks of resource conflicts, displacements, and geopolitical instability in the region? As we all know that South Asia is one of the most conflict prone areas in the world and also critical to climate change. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll take one more and we'll go back to the general. Yes. Mike here.
Good afternoon, sir. This is Lieutenant Colonel Hassan from Defense Services Command and Staff College. Sir, this might be a question and also mix of opinion, you can say. So the crisis we're talking about, the climate security, which brings the question of environmental security and the energy security. Now, the Bangladesh is a country which needs energy and Nepal has abundance of it. The prospects of BVIN, it did not work well for Nepal, Bangladesh, Bhutan, and India, and many of us knows the issues why it did not work. Is there any thinking of the Nepali people and Nepali government that we can bilaterally make some agreement and Bangladesh and Nepal can be benefited from each other in environmental sector and other sectors, connectivity which also connects both the countries and the people. Like Bangladesh has the expertise in garment sectors and others like education sectors. Nepal has the expertise in tourism and also the managing of the this situation in the like earthquake and others. So this is one thing. Second thing is that the the distance Bangladesh and Nepal, the 22 kilometers distance. How can I overcome this geographical distance and become better friends? The Nepal is having the prominence of both the China and India. In one side you have China, one side you have India, which Bangladesh doesn't have. Bangladesh is only having the big neighbor like India. So how we can overcome this 22 kilometers gap between these two countries and the people can come closer and be benefited from our relations? Thank you, sir.
Before I come to you, General, I mean, as somebody who's worked on Nepal-Bangladesh issues for a very long time, I just want to add some observations to what our colleague just said. We are separated basically by only 22 kilometers in the north. Yet, and there's a huge amount of people-to-people contact, people regularly going to Nepal, many Nepalese study in Bangladesh. But yet our understanding of Nepal is still very weak. You would seldom see Nepalese newspapers writing about Bangladesh and vice versa. We had the huge People's Revolution in Bangladesh in August. You have had many major political upheavals in recent times, but I don't think there is enough of an understanding of each other in our countries, and that is a gap that needs to be bridged, because we are practically neighbors. Same goes for our connectivity with Bhutan as well, but yet I think the level of understanding in our countries about one another is still fairly low, and there is a need to also address that. This is not related to purely on climate change or climate security, but broader Bangladesh-Nepal or relations as such. So we'll come back to you now. There's lots of interesting questions, and then we'll go back to the audience again.
Okay, the first question is asked by Colonel about droughts and floods. I think we had enough discussions about it. But talking about the earthquake and the tectonic, let's say, I think we're trying to address more the HADR operations or the response by security forces. You know, when Nepal experienced the earthquake in 2015, the response was very positive. The response, in the sense, the army's response in protecting the lives and properties of the civilians, and was very impressive, and it was very well done. At the same time, it was not just the army alone; it was these other stakeholders, and most importantly, it was the regional power like India's participation, the other armies' participation that came into Nepal. And there is politics in this also. And I think as responders, we must understand the politics of. But one thing for clear is whenever there is disaster, we need response. Because I was one of the main coordinators of the international forces. And is we have to be clear that neighbors come first. So when we were talking about climate change and the implications of and the implications of climate change that goes into disaster, we have to have a common understanding approach. But steps have been taken. You know, joint military exercises have been starting with whether it is bilateral or regional joint military exercises have been starting with the disaster HADR operations. But let me just add in this is I think it is time not just for the armed forces or the defense forces to think of the response. It is time we think of the prevention, the planning, so that we prevent to respond. But second is the cooperation we need from our neighbors, whether Bangladesh Army or so there has to be a greater understanding of how we operate ourselves, how we can help when there are problems in Nepal, how we can help when there are problems in Bangladesh. So I think now that leads me to the second question, which Bharatji just brought out about the relationship between Indian Army and the Nepalese Army. Yes, the relationship between the Indian Army and the Nepalese Army is very good. I mean, Indian Army has been very well been helping the Nepalese Army in its capacity building, in its professional and teamwork. But there's a lot of things that the Nepalese Army and the Indian Army does together. And when you're talking about climate security also, we do participate on joint military exercises to address this, and particularly the response part. But the Nepalese Army's the other part of the Nepalese Army's duty is on the prevention, is what we try to advocate also, so that Indian Army also starts putting in efforts, but at the same time acknowledging the fact, like while you are in uniform and not in uniform, when you are in uniform, then you talk about your main primary tasks of defending the nation and putting the state, but at the same time the untraditional duties you have to do. And the other question was about
Security and defense strategy.
defense strategy and climate security. Nepalese Army has a clear mandate about, and it's a constitutional obligations. It has been spelled out in the constitution. There were two things. One is on the environmental security, and one is on the infrastructure development. So these are places where the army has been, the constitutional has opened up for the army to be part of the. So the doctrine has been made that way, and the army has been putting in stride. I mean, so the army's responsibility also begins with the environmental security or on climate security.
Nepal,
On Nepal-Bangladesh relationship, I mean, this was the first time I took a flight from a direct Kathmandu to Dhaka. You're just flying 1 hour, and there is Bangladesh Biman that flies every day, and in fact, 2 flights in 2 days a week. But yes, putting hours, I mean, and there are a lot of even my friends, and when I meet so many people here, everyone has been to Kathmandu in some capacity or the other. But yes, I do agree that we have not been really able to put our things together of what Bangladesh is for Nepal and what Nepal is for Bangladesh. But at the same time, I think the two countries can put ourselves together to help the region, what it is like when I was talking about the SAC and BIMSTEC, we acknowledge that energy security is one of and which both of us need each other. When we need gas, you need electricity. And what is the 22 kilometers region when we have understanding? But one thing in the positive note I have to say is there has been a trilateral agreement between Bangladesh, India, and Nepal on the transmitting energy security. So it is starting, but I think our relationship, our stronger bond, would pressurize our diplomatic efforts to get things done uh, even quicker than we would like to.
Right. We'll take another tranche of questions. Yes, please.
Thank you. It's Lieutenant Colonel Masu from Bangladesh Army. I have a question to the General. While educating the police forces for mitigating the climate security or educating them in the HADR ops, I want to know a few of the challenges Nepalese Army faced for executing this because we are in the same line and we are also taking some holistic approach for Bangladesh Army to educate in this sector. So I want to know the challenges for achieving long-term and short-term goals to make the defense forces literate in climate security domain. Thank you.
Anyone else? Yes. Kindly introduce yourself.
Thank you, Mr. Shafkat. I'm Assistant Professor Arifur Rahman Bhuiya from the Department of Environmental Science, currently working in the Department of Environmental Science at a public university. So I teach a course, Introduction to Hydrology, a basic course, till the last 5 years. But I haven't been able to answer one question of my students regarding one incident that occurs in 2024 in Bangladesh, that is the Feni flood incident. So what happened is my students asked me, sir, didn't we have any precautions or couldn't we have come forward with any precautionary measures to mitigate this flood? Because the rumors have arisen that the neighboring country refutes claims of causing the floods in Bangladesh. So, Mr. Binaj, my question towards you will be that what should be our initiatives or our armed forces can do to mitigate such incidents in near futures? Because we are predicting not only floods, but we are predicting that Bangladesh is going to face a severe catastrophe due to category 9 or 10 earthquakes in near future in our active fault line, that is the Dauki fault line in the Sylhet region. So what would be your suggestion or what strategies should we come forward to take action against such future incidents? Thank you.
Thank you. Next. I think we can come back to you in a bit.
About the training, we went through a training program. The Nepalese Army went through a training program which was occasional. It was never. But once once the environment was part of our way of going into. So the Nepalese army has established a school for environmental security. So there is a training institution separately created just to teach or quantify on HADR operations. At the same time, the Nepalese army's role in ecological balance and environmental security. So on prevention, planning, response, and preparedness. And the other question was about the answer to the let's say the crisis. Okay. I still believe strongly, and which I brought out like defense diplomacy in green diplomacy. So I feel it's a regional approach. It is the first responders are the security forces, by all means in South Asia because of the capabilities, because of the equipments we hold, because of the priority that is given, because of way the forces are organized. So we are the first responders. The uniformed people are the first responders. But at the same time, if we have a regional mechanism of identifying and monitoring where things can happen and how it can get, and our efforts in putting in uh, joint military exercises together so that we can address these issues. I mean, so we create a narrative as such that so that all the neighboring countries respond. So it becomes a collective effort, and this would also contribute in our relationship as well. So starting from the and this should be, I think, when defense forces are working, I think it is a thing that is accepted. And so a regional approach or regional defense approach for answering the problem would be correct, I think.
Are there any further questions? Yeah. Go.
It's not a question as much as a comment, because the gentleman here began by saying Feni flood was caused by the neighboring country. Now, this narrative has gone unquestioned in Bangladesh, while the fact is that upstream there was excessive rain. It was an unusual weather condition caused by climate change. So 48 hours you have rain that doesn't even come in say 1 year. There's a small dam called Dumba Dam, 120 kilometers upstream from the Bangladesh border. Because of excessive rain, there was power cuts. So normal means of communication between Bangladesh and the relevant authorities on the Indian side were cut. Alternative methods were used to warn. But who had control over that unusual weather condition, which is a manifestation of what happens due to climate change? Yet a narrative went around in Bangladesh that this was deliberately caused by India. Now the question is, what would India gain by creating a deliberate flood? How do you create a deliberate flood? Did you break the dam? The dam is intact. It's just that there was excessive rain. So this lack of communication creates so many problems and creates unnecessary animosities, because these journalists would never bother to find out how much rain came in what time. What is the average rainfall in that area usually? Was this an unusual event? If it was an unusual event, what could have caused it? And if traditional means of communication like telephones fail, what are the other means of communications to warn people downstream? I don't think that happened at all. Yet, because of the interim government here, one of the student leaders made a statement, Mohammed Nurul Islam, I think his name was, and said that this has been caused by India. And everybody seemed to believe it. Facts are completely otherwise, because how does it help an upper riparian to do this kind of a thing to a lower riparian? India and Bangladesh were not at war. India may not have been happy with the fall of the Sheikh Hasina government, but that doesn't mean you do this kind of idiotic thing. But this narrative, I think, was completely wrong, and but is still prevalent today, because people begin by saying India caused the Feni flood.
I think one aspect we have to look at is climate change and disinformation. And through one of our other projects, we've actually done a fair amount of work on this across Bangladesh. And once a narrative is created, it sticks. Even today, you go around, 90% of the people would say that the flood was caused by India, right? And as Bharatji talked about some of the nuts and bolts of it, most people are not even aware of it. So disinformation, where we saw that during the pandemic as well, disinformation, whoever creates it, it comes from all sides, can create a huge effect. And by the time you are countering that disinformation, the damage is completely done. Now we have to imagine a scenario, the number of natural disasters will increase. The population pressure of these countries will increase. So, and we're talking about border tensions, we're talking about climate security, we are in or we have an audience who are largely practitioners. We have to be very frank and candid. So, at a time when, let's say, sea levels are rising, cities and villages are getting inundated, and we will face scenarios like this 2050 and beyond. People will be trying to relocate. There will be large-scale displacement. Now, ladies and gentlemen, think about a scenario. What kind of a force multiplier, negative force multiplier, will disinformation be in that context? Too often we talk about climate change purely in the context of science and environment. But there are all these other aspects to climate change, like security, like information, like media, that we don't talk about. And in a region which is already plagued by conflict, border tensions, mistrust, disbelief, and so on, political tensions. I mean, we are not unfortunately, we are not a well-connected region. We don't have a very well-functioning regional cooperation mechanism. The smallest thing can create a large-scale tension. So I think we have to be very cognizant about these things and devise appropriate strategies. We are fast reaching a point where there's a particular anecdote that Colonel Nalin always used to say, and I really like it, that we have 1 year's worth of rainfall in one day. And if you remember last May when we were in your conference in Colombo, we saw that. I mean, it rained for 3 days nonstop. I've never seen so much rain in Colombo in one go. So even our preparedness to deal with disasters will be challenged, because our preparedness, our readiness is based on, to use a military term, based on our existing threat perception, right? And that existing perception, existing calculation is based on meteorological data and other things. But we are having natural disasters which are really surprising us, like the Feni floods. There was a small earthquake even somewhere near it was felt even in Bangladesh today, so it must have originated in Nepal or China or somewhere. There are, the temperature patterns are completely haywire. We are in the last days of February. Yes, it was not supposed to be cold, but it was not supposed to be warm either. When I used to go to Nepal 10, 15 years ago, until March, you had to really wear winter clothes, right? Now you go to Nepal in March, you need air conditioning. So, I mean, we are entering a completely different territory altogether. And how we sort of retool ourselves, re-equip ourselves, how we change our thought process will be very important. Like one of the things we are really struggling with is how to cool all these buildings we have in Dhaka and still conserve energy. Because we are, on one hand, we are talking about going vertical to save space. But when you create a building like this, it costs hundreds of thousands of taka and a lot of energy to climate control these buildings. So these are some of the issues we really need to look at. And I would again emphasize on the point that we have to have a more holistic understanding of climate change. Too often we are bogged down in just adaptation, mitigation, or loss and damage. Those are very important things. But climate security, understanding the nexus between climate and information, understanding the nexus between climate and geopolitics is absolutely crucial. And as the general mentioned in his presentation, these are some of the issues that we will have to look at. Arctic, I mean, we haven't talked about it because it's not relevant to our region. It's a vast new battleground that is opening up. It will completely reshape geopolitical competition between the West and Russia on who controls the Arctic. One aspect I want to touch upon is in terms of HDR preparedness. In Spain and France, I have seen there are dedicated disaster management units, similar to the National Disaster Recovery Force NDRF in India, but more specialized, comprising of all branches of the armed forces, which are basically rapid response forces who can be deployed on short notice. Given the propensity of natural calamities in our region, we could potentially, because we have resource constraints, so I think each country having its own disaster recovery force is going to be an expensive idea. So we could potentially look at a composite South Asian national disaster recovery or HDR unit, and all countries could provide a budget. It could be a multinational unit that can then be deployed in other places, because I vividly remember the 2015 earthquake. It was a colossal HDR operation. I mean, it took a huge amount of effort to rescue people from various places, and a lot of regional and international support was required. So we need to learn from those issues. So one last batch of questions in case if there is anything, and then I'll go to the general and then make some sum up remarks as well. Yeah. Zoeb? Please be brief.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is Zoeb Tibro from BIPSS. I am research intern. So basically, there have been quite a lot of discussion about defense role in climate security and climate change, and as the honorable speaker has already mentioned about this thing, that he has mentioned quote unquote that it's a defense role to tackle climate change, and our session chair has just mentioned one thing, that there should be a holistic approach in addressing climate security, and we should be discussing about climate and security both. So I believe there has been already a number of national policies in Nepal or in other South Asian countries ca- re- related to climate change and climate adaptation and climate whatever it is. But my question is here: is there any possibility to of adapting adapting national security policy that is integrated with climate pragmatism, or is there any possibility
Oh, yeah.
of climate accessibility?
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Any further questions? Any comments from the audience? All right. So, General, I think we'll go back to you for this question and also any other remarks you want to make, and then we'll close.
Let me give you the. I just brought out in my presentation about the national security policy addressing the climate issues, environmental. Yes, it has been taken as a risk for national security, and so that the tools of the government and the machineries start preparing or to fulfill that. So that's why the Nepalese army is not just is a response; it is there for the prevention also. So that was the second part of the. But I quite agree with Muni here about the regional dynamics, which I also brought out in the way forward. I think we have to have a region and defense. We've already started, actually. We've already started working together. So since we've started, it's just a matter of inducting the things that we need. And the things that we need is how do you prevent climate security? How do you address climate security? At the same time, how do you respond to that? And addressing it as a collective effort of all the forces, because the uniform holders, I mean, like whenever we go, I mean, we do have a understanding to each other. I mean, politics may be different, but our relationship when we see uniform is different. So I think it's a good beginning. I think we've already started, but pushing it forward with and with the regional organizations of defense forces to address climate security would also be good. That's why when I put two things forward, one was the regional government. Though SAARC and BIMSTEC are not as effective as it should be, I mean, a regional government to address these issues on environment and climate. I said this should be a binding point of getting politics in or streamlining politics into addressing our common challenges. So security now is addressing it in a comprehensive way. Comprehensive security is a way of addressing. So all the national forces having comprehensive approach would also assist in the regional dynamics of getting all of our uniform people together to prevent and respond to climate security.
While we bring this session to a close, just as some concluding remarks, I think one of the fundamental lessons that climate change teaches us is that it doesn't recognize any sovereign boundaries. When an earthquake happens, when floods happen, when excessive rainfall happens, it doesn't bother whether it is Tripura or Feni. When a natural disaster occurs, it affects people in Nepal, people in Bangladesh, people in Sri Lanka in a very similar manner. So we may have our cartographic anxieties, we may have our differences, we may have our political differences and security challenges and so on. But on this particular issue, these ecological issues, the disasters, when we are essentially battling with nature, we have to operate in a seamless manner, irrespective and above our differences. And I think that is ultimately the most important lesson that I see that we need to draw from climate change. And for people who live in Bangladesh, climate change is an everyday reality. I mean, I go to a lot of conferences abroad where there is a lot of climate skepticism, particularly with the new administration in the United States. But for us in Bangladesh, for us in South Asia, climate change is an everyday reality. We face cyclones, we face natural disasters, we face displacement on a daily basis. I mean, you saw in Ifat's presentation earlier about people whose everyday livelihood has been affected by effects of climate change. Thousands of people have been displaced, from hundreds of thousands actually, have been displaced from their homes after cyclones. And these are countries which are already tackling very significant resource constraints. 70% of our government's job is right now concentrated on how to keep essential prices in a manageable level during the month of Ramadan. So in a situation like this, we don't have the luxury where we can spend billions to future-proof some of these issues. So in a situation like this, when effects of climate change will increase, when sea level rise will increase, become a bigger challenge, when temperatures will continue to rise, our IPCC projection talks about 14% loss of landmass for Bangladesh. Based on current projections, we are looking at 25 million people getting displaced. I don't need to say to this audience, but to international audiences, when I do these presentations, I always say we are looking at a population larger than Australia, basically, who have lost everything. Because our population sizes are so massive. I was in Germany and I was telling a group of German audience that our internet user population in Bangladesh is higher than the population of Germany. We may be small geographic entities in terms of sheer size, some of us, but our population sizes, I mean, look at Bangladesh, it has got a population larger than Russia. So in a situation like this, when we have already significant economic challenges, climate change and the sort of various threat multiplier effects of climate change, the stressors that it is bringing to our system, it is going to exacerbate the challenges we have. So it is absolutely incumbent upon us that we all work together. It cannot be combated nationally. We work together collectively within the region. We collectively work together to resurrect the SARC platform because it has helped us in the past, and tackle the issues of climate change and particularly its security dimensions. Because, ladies and gentlemen, this is already 2025 and 2050 is only a quarter century away. Before we know, the effects will already hit us. I mean, we have one SARC member state which is practically going to lose all its territory, Maldives. vast parts of southern Bangladesh will probably be inundated by 2100. So, and the unfortunate thing is the world is again so mired in geopolitical tension and rivalry that the attention that climate change and some of the other global issues were receiving over the past decade, that's again going to get derailed. But I think the onus is on us in the South Asian region that we rise above our political differences, our sectarian divides, our own cartographic anxieties, and we start talking about the issues that affect all of us, and that is climate change. General, thank you so much for your presentation, and I would like to thank the audience again for their questions and comments. This is our last working session, so we will now take a short break and then commence the closing ceremony. Thank you again. Thank you.
Distinguished guests, as we come to the conclusion of this incredible 2 days conference, I now invite Major General ANM Muniruzzaman, NDC PSC, retired President of BIPSS, to deliver the concluding remarks. Thank you.
Distinguished participants, a very good afternoon and assalamu alaikum. We now come to the end of our 2 days of deliberation on the issues of climate security, particularly focusing on South Asia. At the outset, I would like to give you the regrets from our chief guest, the Honorable Minister for Ports and Shipping, who was supposed to be with us this afternoon but has suddenly fallen sick and under the doctor's strict advice is unable to leave his home. Nevertheless, we will conclude the session by recapitulating some of the issues that were discussed, and I must say the discussion was extremely rich and substantive. It is difficult for me to recapture everything that was said in this room over the last 2 days, but I shall share with you some of the key takeaways that I take away from this conference. South Asia today is one of the most vulnerable regions of the world in the face of climate change challenges, particularly in the domain of climate security. One of the most threatening challenges that we face in South Asia is the prospect of hydro conflict. I know Bharat talked to us about hydro wisdom or water wisdom, but the potential for hydrotension and hydro conflict looms very large. We have the potential of the breakdown of Indus Water Treaty between India and Pakistan, which is under immense pressure now. We have prospects of hydrotension and eventually possibly conflict between China and India. There are hydrotensions between Bangladesh and India over sharing of the transboundary rivers. So overall, there are several trigger points of tension and even conflict over issues of water. Unless we solve these issues, there is great potential that climate-induced conditions of water can bring us to a point of conflict. And I must caution that many strategic thinkers, if you read them, they indicate that if ever there is a conflict in South Asia, it may not be over any other issues, but maybe over water. So climate change and water is a major issue of concern for South Asia. We have issues of melting of the glaciers in the Himalayan caps, which is causing tremendous concern for all countries, particularly lower riparian countries like Bangladesh and others. Our esteemed participant from Nepal would know it better than me that in the Himalayan glaciers, the ice caps are melting faster than any other time. The deforestation in the upper hills has also resulted in creation of over 5,000 glacial lakes, with many of them, or most of them, with unstable banks. And therefore, the prospect of outburst flooding is very, very high. So we could then result in what is called GLOF, glacial lakes outburst flooding. And if that happens, we will not only have flooding, we'll have tsunamis. Imagine a country like Bangladesh with the prospect of sudden tsunamis coming down the Himalayas. It will wash away cities, towns, and townships, and people's lives and property. South Asia also faces extreme weather events. We have now more frequent flooding, cyclones, and natural disasters. Both the frequency and the lethality has increased over the years. And this kind of events are going to be more frequent in the future. We are also seeing heating of South Asia. Our temperatures are increasing. Many of the South Asian cities have experienced 50-degree plus temperature last year. And any city over 50 degrees Celsius temperature is a city that is unlivable. So we have grave danger from warming and heating of South Asian cities. We have heard about food security. Food security will be a major issue in South Asia. South Asian population is increasing fast, and our food production is threatened by climate change impacts. Only in the case of Bangladesh, by 2050, we could see 10% drop in wheat production and as much as 30% drop in rice production, which will create a situation of great food security situation for Bangladesh. Similar is the case in most other South Asian countries. So therefore, food security can be a major issue of concern for South Asian countries. Energy security is another area of concern due to climate-induced conditions. Most of our energy production facilities are vulnerable to climate change. It is also vulnerable to climate disasters. If you just recall the Fukushima nuclear disaster caused by earthquake and then tsunami, the kind of havoc that it created in Fukushima is only tip of the iceberg. We can have bigger incidents elsewhere. So energy security for South Asia is gravely threatened by our lack of capacity for hydropower due to climate change and other potential disasters. We talked about livelihood security. Many of our traditional livelihood for our people is getting lost, creating unemployment situation in many countries. For example, due to saltwater intrusion into our sweetwater rivers, many of the Bangladeshi fishermen are unable to fish anymore in some areas. And that creates a livelihood security for the fishermen community in Bangladesh. The Sundarbans in down south is gradually being lost due to sea level rise, and also creating a problem of livelihood for people in that area who depend on extraction of various properties from the forest. So livelihood security in South Asia in future will be a major issue of concern. Perhaps a major concern for South Asia, in particular Bangladesh, is sea level rise, or SLR. The sea level is certainly rising, and in many cases it is irreversible now. A 1 meter rise of the sea in down south of Bangladesh in the Bay of Bengal will mean a 20% loss of territory to the sea, creating a climate refugee population of 30 million plus. And this is the scenario that can also happen to other South Asian cities and places. When that happens, the massive displacement of human population due to sea level rise is a situation which most South Asian countries are unable to cope with. Globally, this is also a major problem. About 70% of the global population live within 100 kilometers from the sea. So a sea level rise will displace population throughout the world. Just before COVID, I was asked by the UN Security Council to go and brief the Security Council in New York on the security implications of climate change, in particular sea level rise. The briefing I gave to the UN Security Council threatened most of the members beyond imagination. And that is only the tip of the iceberg. I also would like to say that most of our major cities, our financial centers, our centers on which our global supply chain management depends, are all very, very vulnerable to sea level rise. Cities like Mumbai, Shanghai, Karachi, Chittagong, all are extremely vulnerable to sea level rise. Any disruption in these major cities will send a shockwave to the international financial system and also to the international supply chain management. Sea level rise is also going to create the scale of migration, which will make it very difficult for nations to cope with. As I mentioned also previously, due to various impacts of climate change, the global poverty, including poverty levels in South Asia, is increasing, and many more millions of people are pushed down the poverty lanes, which will create social destabilization. A point that did not come to our discussion much in the last 2 days is loss of biodiversity. We are fast losing biodiversity on which our ecological balance depends, especially in countries like Bangladesh, which is the world's largest riverine delta. River flows, biodiversity, and the likes are critical to our survival, and loss of biodiversity can have devastating consequences for countries in South Asia, in particular Bangladesh. We are also faced with the problem of climate leadership. Most of our leaders in South Asia are not strategic enough to face and understand the challenges of climate change. Our political masters live by 5-year cycles. They only look at the next election. To cope with climate change, you have to have a visionary leadership who can look 50 years ahead and 100 years ahead. Most of our leaders in South Asia are unable to do that. Therefore, we have now come to the point that even globally, many of our leaders are not understanding the challenges. There are major superpowers who have now come out of COP15 or the Paris Agreement, which will have devastating consequences for the international climate regime. I was present in Paris myself during the negotiations, and I know how difficult it was for the international community to come to that agreement. Now that we are coming out of that agreement, the prospect of capping the temperature at 2.5 degrees looks to be very remote for me. And anything above 2.5 degrees or anything above 3 degrees has absolutely devastating consequences for the world. And that's where we are probably heading. A last challenge that I want to mention here, that many of the rich countries in the West particularly think there is a shortcut solution to the problem. And many of my colleagues in the West are now toying with the idea of geoengineering. But geoengineering is a technique which has not been properly internationally tested, particularly from the security point of view. And if it is deployed without proper international legal regimes and testing, it can have very, very negative consequences for which we are not ready. So before we finish, let me also now devote the next few minutes. So what is the way out for South Asia? What should you do? The first thing that we should do a comprehensive threat mapping. We need to understand all the challenges with empirical proofs and numbers. So a comprehensive threat mapping of South Asian climate change threat environment is necessary. We need a comprehensive strategy for South Asia for multilateral climate resilience, to which all countries in South Asia must sign up to. For our water issues, we should go towards a joint and a basin management of water systems, particularly of transboundary rivers. We need to have a disaster preparedness and response cooperation mechanism for South Asia that our last speaker also talked about at length. We also need a climate disaster response task force. Shavkat and the General also mentioned about this, and we need a South Asian rapid deployment force that can be called upon at a very short notice. Yesterday, at a dinner with the EU ambassador in his house, he mentioned about the European assets that is held by a single country which can be tapped by any other country in the European Union, thereby sharing the burden of cost of holding assets to meet disasters. And that is the way South Asia should go. We should also look at green energy for South Asia, and there is a dire need to build a cross-border green energy grid so that our green energy creation can be shared with others. For example, Nepal has tremendous hydropower capacity. Perhaps Nepal alone can meet bulk of the energy needs of the region, but without a grid that cannot be shared. So we need to go for creation of a South Asian green energy grid. We are talking about migration management policies for South Asia that could be agreed and shared by all South Asian countries, because migration will happen whether we like it or not. South Asia must be prepared before it happens in a manner which is not managed well. For food insecurity, South Asia needs to create a South Asian food bank that can meet the disaster needs of the South Asian countries. South Asia needs to look at climate diplomacy from a South Asian lens also. We have representatives here from the Foreign Office. I'll particularly ask your attention that we need to look at the prospect of creating a network of South Asian climate diplomats who can negotiate on behalf of South Asia in the international forums. Through those kind of active diplomacy, we can also take our prospect of loss and damages to be placed at the international tables effectively. We need to invite the private sector, get them involved in climate response. This is something that has not been tried in South Asia. I know in many countries internationally or in Europe, this is a prospect and they are trying and working with it. In South Asia, we need to get the private sector involved in our climate management strategies. Through our diplomacy and through our collective action, we also need to attract or tap into the international various mechanisms of climate fund that is available. When I talk to our policymakers in Bangladesh, many of them are not aware of many of the existing fund mechanisms that is existing already internationally. We need to be aware of that and attract them so that we can tap the resources for our needs. We certainly need to educate our people and mainstream climate education in all our education systems. And that is something that needs to be done not only in Bangladesh, but all over South Asia. There should be a mechanism for technical cooperation and scientific knowledge creation and cooperation, not only among South Asian countries, but South Asia should also be able to attract the same kind of knowledge sharing with countries in the West who have more capacity. So the order is tall. We have a long way to go. The problems are many, resources are very limited, and the time is short. So we have to move fast so that we are not overtaken by the climate challenges. South Asia, and particularly South Asian leaders, need to redefine security. We have to go beyond the traditional notions of border security and the traditional nature of unresolved disputes and look at the real problem that is coming to face us. So, through redefining security, cooperation, and sustainability, we need to create a secure future for South Asia, and that is the way to go. The time for action is now. I urge upon all of you that you take away the messages from these last 2 days and take it back to your organizations, institutions, back to your countries. We have a lot of work to do. And I thank you all for your participation, for your active contribution, for your remarks and questions. Your presence and your contribution enrich the conference. We shall continue to engage with you in future. This is not a one-time effort. Through our websites and emails, we'll constantly update you regularly and whatever is happening with the issues of climate change and our project. We'll also be sending you a certificate electronically for your active participation in the conference, for which we are grateful and we thank you. I thank you all for being with us and hope to see you again. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for your insightful remarks. With this, we officially conclude the Regional Conference on Climate Security in South Asia. We sincerely appreciate the contributions of all our speakers, panelists, and participants who made this conference a great success. We are deeply grateful to the European Union for their invaluable support for the conference. Thank you all.